So the brain tells you you're hungry, and then you say consciously, you know what, I'm hungry? Or the brain tells you you're thirsty, and then you suddenly say, oh, I'm thirsty? You mean you're being driven, and you're not consciously aware of it until right after the drive occurs. Interesting experiment. Yes?
Even in a conversation with someone, like, the thought will appear in your head before you think that I should say this.
I don't have a problem with Nietzsche. I think we are driven. I think a lot of things go on for us, and then we have a consciousness that accompanies it. And it's just like this. It's not that far away from it. But I think we really undermine ourselves if we don't allow for that. Look, we've been so I'm not trying to change you people. We've been so taught that we're in charge. At the end of the semester, we'll get into determinism and free will, and you're all going to think you have free will. Science says that's not true on a quantum level, that it's not true at all. But we've been so conditioned to understand ourselves that way that that's the way we address the world. That's the way we interact in the world. And yet there may be something, and I think Nietzsche again comes way before quantum theory and string theory. And now science is telling us, well, it's really hard for us to deal with this because we're in charge, that maybe we're more responsive to this will to power, than we're aware we are. That doesn't mean we can't live in this world and say, yeah, sure, I'm in charge, sure, you know. And as long as we all get along and it's compatible, we can be okay that way. But that may really not be what's going on at the lower level of life, okay? Doesn't change life. But I think Nietzsche was really insightful about it. So yeah, I think sometimes those things happen to us and the thought pops into our head and we even talk about that. Well, I never thought of that before. I thought just popped into my head. Really, where did it come from? Epiphanies. Some of the greatest moments in humanity are epiphanies. People just, things pop into their head, whether it's inventions or people just have these, they just pop into our head. How many of you are familiar with Dr. Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream speech? Anybody? We do? Okay. So that's in August. I think it's 1963. He's on the Mall. It's a 17-minute speech. It's timed. He's been through it before. He's out there in the mall. He gets to minute 13. And he pauses because he realizes he doesn't quite have the audience captured the way he's used to in the church. What you don't know, unless you've reviewed it, is that that's in August of 63. In December of 62, he's in Cobo Hall in Detroit with his entourage of people, and he makes mention of the fact that he's germinating this idea called I Had a Dream, but it's not ready for prime time. And in August 1963 on the Mall in DC, it still wasn't ready for prime time. It wasn't even in the speech. But one of his close associates is named Mahalia Jackson. She's a black gospel singer. He'd call her up once in a while on the phone. He says, sing me a song, Mahalia, and she would. She knew him well enough to call him Martin. He gets to minute 13, and he doesn't quite feel like he's got the audience where he wants them, and he pauses. And if you watch the whole video, you'll see there's a slight pause. And Mahalia, he's looking out this way. Mahalia's over here. She leans forward ever so slightly, and she says, tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream. I have a dream. Wasn't even in his mind. Got planted there by someone else. And that's how we remember that presentation he gave in August of 63. It was the I Had a Dream speech. So you may be right. I think sometimes that happens to us. Things pop in. Now, I am not asking you to buy into it. I just want you to be maybe open a little bit to see if maybe that's what's going on. Yes?
Is he saying that the only good and evil that exists is what is inside of ourselves?
No, that's a great question too. Eh?
It's how we determine it arbitrarily, whatever is good or bad.
No,
There's just an action and then we...
No, that's a good question too. Nietzsche then says good and evil, and he writes a book called Beyond Good and Evil. Nietzsche says that if you adopt the divine right of kings, what happens is there's a small elite class that defines morality for everybody. That's the master morality, and then you have the slave morality. What he says then is that the masters define their values as good, and all other values are bad, not evil. They're bad. Everything that is not good is therefore bad. Well, in contrast to that, you have the slave morality. They're the ones who invent good and evil. For them, the slaves define all that's good, the master's morality, because it's oppressive and in charge, as evil. Resentment fuels their reevaluation of the aristocratic morals. This gives rise to altruism. In order to put up with this, pardon my French, crap, you end up turning the other cheek because you have no power to contend with it. You're under the divine authority of the king, queen, Caesar, whatever. So it gives rise to an altruism. You put up with it, but there's a resentment that grows because you don't want to be in that position, but you have no authority. Nietzsche says you have all the authority you need. It's called the will to power. But if you don't recognize that, then you end up being powerless. You end up being a slave to the master's morality. These are the values necessary for suffering under the master's morality. This, therefore, must be God's will, because the king says it is, and the king has this divine connection. It offers metaphysical punishment because it lacks genuine will to power. Heaven and hell, eternal life, and the afterlife for those who suffered through this life. Slave morality, now he identifies Christianity, he's in Western Europe, as a virtue that benefits the weak, and it builds into them compassion, servility, being a servant, and humility. So for him then, this master-slave morality is what's locked into humanity. There's an elite ruling class, kings, queens, Caesars, pharaohs, emperors, and dictators, and they make all the rules because they have the power behind them. And what can you do if the power behind you is divine? If you really believe that, if you have no way to counteract that, what do you do other than submit to it? So you get master morality, slave morality. Master morality, we're good, you're bad. Or you'd be where we are and you're not, so you're bad, we're good. The slave morality says, no, you're evil, but I have no way to combat it. So I'm going to assume the goodness of my own servile living, my own subservient living, but I'm not going to surrender the fact that you're evil. Life should not be under these conditions. Nietzsche comes along and he says, what if God is dead? People then can no longer know for certain what is good and evil. We can no longer blame God for our own actions. Second chocolate sundae. I do this, I eat low-fat frozen yogurt, espresso chip, and I'll have a bowl and then I can justify another bowl. And sometimes I might want to say, well, the devil made me do it. Lack of responsibility for personal behavior. Same thing with the Crusades, Jim Jones in Guyana, David Koresh perhaps out in Waco. God told me to do it. Not me. So for him, it's an abdication of personal responsibility. For him, then, existentialism sets us free from this divine command theory of ethics. We're not determined by some outside forces. Life, therefore, is there for the making or creating. You make your own choices. You define yourself through your own efforts. A couple of weeks, we'll talk about existentialism. Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, they're the modern-day people that elevate existentialism to how we deal with it. Now, they do have a morality. For Nietzsche, Nietzsche ignores morality completely. So, a summation. According to Nietzsche, the will to power is the driving, and get this right, people, it's the unconscious force. It's not your afterthought. It's this driving force within you, which causes us to overcome and grow. It's provocative at the same time that it's symbiotic. Ultimate end of all life is power expressed through growth. It can be shown that every living thing does everything it can, not only to preserve itself, but to become more, to have and to want to have more. Growth, in one word, for Nietzsche was life itself. He's famous. This is Kelly Clarkson. Is that her right name? She's got the song out, if it doesn't kill you, it'll make you stronger. That's a direct quote from Nietzsche. Resistance, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. In fact, Nietzsche thought that if you don't have resistance, you'll never gain strength. Do I have athletes in here? The only way to build muscles is to break them down and hurt them. And when you break them down and hurt them, and then you feed them with protein, they get built up and you get stronger, bigger, stronger, bigger. It's the only way to grow, through resistance. When you really sit down and think about it, studying resistance. Everything in life requires overcoming resistance. And if you don't do that, even walking, do you understand how you walk? Do you understand how your muscles work? You have tensor and relaxor muscles, and without those two working in harmony with each other, you don't locomote. You don't go where you want to go. It's that constant resistance that you go through that helps you. This morning I called our secretary and I said, there's a good chance I'm going to call off class this afternoon. Why? Because my best friend is the commode right now. Pardon me. And then I thought, you know what, I can either succumb to this or I can just go ahead and get it up under my belt and work at it. That doesn't mean I wouldn't end up canceling class if it's that bad, but I had a part to say in it. Overcoming resistance. Overcoming resistance. Nietzsche says the only way to grow is to overcome resistance. If you lay down and it rolls over you, get comfortable on the ground because you're never going to get up. You're never going to be an overcomer. This growth is accompanied by resistance, which offers us the greatest possibility of growth and hence an increase in power. By overcoming the resistance that stands in our way, we achieve the greatest of all human passions, growth, or as Nietzsche says, overcoming. I am that which must always overcome itself by overcoming my previous limitations. Did you ever see that movie, is it called The Internship? With Vaughn, somebody or other? Yeah. At the very end of it, they have to try and sell Google. And there's a lot that goes on, but in the end, they go into a pizzeria and try and get this guy to expand his business, right? And this is a guy who's been successful in this one place in wherever he is, California. And he's not accepting the idea that he has to grow. And Vince Vaughn, is that his name, Vince Vaughn, makes a real interesting statement. He says, if you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them. And Nietzsche would say, you know, that's the problem. Most of us fight for our limitations. Well, I don't think I can do that. Have you tried? Oh, yeah, I tried. Have you tried again? Have you tried again? Have you tried again? Well, no. Okay, and I'm not making a moral judgment. Great, then you get to live with your limitations. And we have limitations. I mean, I'd like to be 6'4". I do have boots, and they make me 6'2", and everyone says, oh, you're a little taller today. It must be your shoes. So there are built-in limitations, but that doesn't mean we have to accept all of our limitations. That's what Nietzsche's talking about here. It's the resistance. It's overcoming that. So this is Nietzsche's higher man. For him, and this is where he gets in trouble when people misinterpret this, all men are not equal human beings. The ones who are most devoted to self-overcoming enjoy the most value. We're not all equal people. That doesn't mean some of us are diminutive or that means we're of lesser value. We're just not all of the same value. Some in some areas are more superior. Some in other areas are more superior. Some have mastered many areas and are more superior. I'm not talking about, they have, the right to rule over us. They just seem to have conquered certain areas in their life. And Nietzsche says we're not all created equal. But the goal of life is the will to power, is to overcome and to overcome and to overcome until you ascend to your highest capacity. And you look on the playing field and we're not all going to be equal. Okay, fine. If we understand the power in symbiotic relationships, we'll band together and grow in power even though it's not